As we've just mentioned there, my background is both within travel and travel insurance. So I've sat on the side of the desk where I have sold travel and had multiple customers that have had difficulties with getting travel insurance elsewhere. So I've had that conversation from a sales perspective while selling travel. But I've also worked for Covermore Travel Insurance, who some of you may be aware of, for 8.5 years. Covermore are the travel insurance provider for the likes of Air New Zealand, Flight Centre, AMI, State. So you may have used a Covermore policy in the past. As we just mentioned, this year I bought a company called Health and Travel Insurance Brokers, and I've now switched it to just Travel Insurance Brokers. But we specialize as a travel insurance broker. So we are an insurance broker, but we do not do anything other than travel. Okay, so if you ask me about insuring your vehicle or your house, I'm going to know nothing about it, and I'm going to refer you elsewhere. Okay, but we are specialists in travel insurance. The business itself has operated since ages ago. It's been operating for over 20 years. As I say, I've worked closely with the business over the last decade, but it's been going for a very, very long time. And as what I want to do today is to try and break some of those myths about travel insurance, particularly for people with medical conditions like blood cancers or leukemias, or any other medical condition for that matter, heart conditions, all those sorts of things, and elderly travelers, et cetera. Now, the fact that you guys have come to this room for this session means that you obviously have a plan to go on holiday at some point, okay? And you've had difficulty getting insurance, all right? So I'm not going to, we'll go through it. Myth number one, travel insurance covers everything. That's what it's there for, right? Wrong. Okay, it doesn't cover everything. I'm glad that this gentleman's just shaking his head. That's not true. Believe it or not, there's a lot of people that think that. They go, well, it's insurance, you know. I didn't know that that was going to happen, so therefore it's covered, right? And you go, oh, no. And then when you say no, they say, oh, was that in the small print? I say, no, that was in the policy wording. It's not small print, it's actually the policy, all right? However, myth number two, travel insurance will not cover any pre-existing blood cancer conditions. That is also wrong, okay? The truth is actually somewhere in the middle, all right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you some examples today, and I'm going to explain to you, with my experience working for a travel insurance provider, I've had a lot of experience with underwriters and had conversations with underwriters and looking at risk and how they analyze risk and how they attribute cover dependent on what they see as that risk. Now, there's a lot of factors that they look at when they consider that risk. As a broker, we have access to all the travel insurance providers, other than the direct online ones. So, you know, a one cover or something like that you see online, we're not going to do anything with them. But the likes of Southern Cross, Kiwi Holiday Insurance, Allianz, Covermore, some of these you will be familiar with, others you won't be so familiar with, because they're a bit more niche. And therefore, they do offer us a good opportunity for the sorts of things that we're looking at today to get cover. But we don't we broker this insurance. We don't mark it up. We don't. If you go online and you jump onto Southern Cross's website and you get a travel insurance quote, you will get exactly the same premium through us. We are simply just a service. Okay. We work out the brokerages and stuff with them, but so this is what we do. This is the field that we play in. Now, what I've done is I've put together some examples. Now, you guys obviously know a lot more about the blood cancers and leukemias and the conditions than I do, so I have sort of just thrown in some parameters, and I want to show you how it works. Okay, so this one here, we've done a medical assessment for somebody with chronic myeloid leukemia in remission. This is a worldwide policy, right? So when you're talking a worldwide policy, that is the biggest risk policy, because that means you could go to the States and be covered on this policy, okay? We'll talk a bit more about that in a minute. And what it does is it asks some questions. So what it's trying to do is it's trying to ascertain what is the risk to this particular customer with CML, okay? So it says what type of disease you have. CML, got that. Has a bone marrow or stem cell transplant been performed as a result in a complete remission? Yes, it has. How long ago did this transplant take place? Between 2 and 5 years ago. Did the transplant result in a graft versus host disease? No, it didn't. Great, happy with that. Included, covered. Okay, so straight away we've broken the myth that if you've had a blood cancer or leukemia or any sort. Yeah, so has it been resulted in I'm going to come to that. So this is kind of where we look at that middle ground. So we look and we go, okay, based on that sort of criteria, they're saying, yeah, okay, well you've had a treatment within the last 2 to 5 years. You've had this condition. You're in remission. That's fine. It's basically ascertaining the risk. Okay. Different example. This is now just a South Pacific policy. Should be lower risk, right? It's not a worldwide policy. It's a South Pacific policy. This is looking at acute leukemia. Okay, right. Have you been advised to have any treatment for this condition in the last 5 years? Yes. What age were you when you were diagnosed? Between 11 and 18. Random parameters. I've answered these questions randomly. Here's the key one. Are you currently undergoing any treatment or is any planned? Yes. Unable to provide cover. Okay. Now, if I do exactly the same thing, but just change that answer to no, so no, I'm not actually having any treatment at the moment, that's now covered. And that is how... Yeah. 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 So,
Geb, sorry, just before you answer that, I'll just repeat the question, which was how is treatment defined? And as we go on, if we have questions, I'll just bring the microphone to you if that's okay, because then it gets recorded, so it makes it easier for people to listen to later on.
I'll make you stop and put your hand up, and I won't talk until the microphone's in front of you. So it's a good question. So would an oral chemo tablet would it be considered treatment? Yes, it probably would. But I could always run that. But that's the beauty of taking your insurance with a broker, with a specialist. We can actually contact the insurer and have that conversation with them. And I do that on a daily basis, and my team do that on a daily basis. We will always go to the insurer. When we get those little grey areas, we will always go there and we will fight on your behalf to say, well, actually, this is the situation. Can we get cover? And if this person says no, this crowd say no, all right, cool. We'll go and try these guys and see how they look at it. And that's what we do. It's a good question.
I just travelled recently and I didn't even get past go because my cancer didn't come up as a standard one. So
you're special.
I'm special.
Yeah, okay, good.
So what happens then? Before you even...
So did you try and do insurance? Did you go through that process and,
yes.
And it just didn't come up? Like it didn't exist or?
Yeah, it didn't exist. So therefore they lumped me in with something else which was worse than what I've got. And then it was a no at the end of it.
Was that done through a travel agent?
No, it was done through Alliance, through the credit card.
Okay.
Insurance.
Right. So that's where that situation there is where I would say, right, so we would have a conversation about what your condition is. Then I, on your behalf, would I'd go to the insurers and I'd say, this is the condition. What should we be disclosing this as? If, like you said, you went through Allianz and they said, it's this, and you went, well, it's not really that, and you weren't comfortable with that, all right, cool. Now we can go to a different insurer and say, well, let's try a cover more and see what they say. And they might say, well, actually, you can declare it as this. And you go, well, that's way better because that's actually more accurate for what I have. Does that make sense? So again, that's the beauty of what we do. That's why we're here. We don't do. Yeah, of course. We don't do a lot of insurance policies for mum, dad, 2 kids going to the Gold Coast. We don't do many of those, funnily enough. because people can do that themselves. This is what we do. It's exactly that sort of scenario.
Oh, yeah,
Gary.
I've got a stem cell transplant and I was in remission for 10 years. I've been in remission for 10 years, but in November, we had another stem cell transplant. So I've had 2 stem cells.
Okay.
But I'm in remission again now. So
Yep.
well, it's only been 6 months.
Yeah.
Since
I mean, the thing is,
I'm in
Gary.
remission,
Yeah,
so-
yeah. The thing is, Gary, you're in remission,
Yeah.
and that's the sort of thing that insurers want to know. So that's where you see where
I've
these
got 10
questions
years
are
of
going.
this one,
Yeah,
so I'm
right.
in remission again.
Yeah.
So I did a second stem cell
Yeah.
transplant.
So, well,
Probably just depends on the remission, doesn't it, really? I mean,
they do put
I've
it.
been 5 years and they describe it as chronic, stable, always stable, nothing can just goes up and down.
So, for example, right. So you've been in remission for 5 years plus. Not quite.
They describe it as chronic, stable.
Chronic
No,
stable.
I'm still on chemo
Okay. Yeah.
but it's just been like that. for
Yeah,
so
right.
long.
Yeah.
Someone no drugs at all.
So you're not. So they do draw it when you're assessing risk. They do have to draw lines in the sand. So what they do is they look at time frames. So for example, when you see this, they've gone 3 years here, 5 years here. So they will look at that and try and draw those lines in the sand. So for you, Gary, they might turn around and the question might be, well, have you been in remission for X to X period of time?
I was in remission the first time, and this time now I'm in remission at
Yeah.
the moment. But I'm only going to wait for 3 weeks anyway.
Where you go?
I'm going to sail up to Alaska, going up to Alaska.
Okay.
Vancouver, going up.
We'll talk.
I don't think until May.
We'll talk a bit more about that because there's a reason I ask.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. But it's probably a really good sort of like a case study, a good example. Come to me. We'll talk about it, and we can have a look.
We're faithful with big travel and stuff.
Yeah. Remission is the key word for insurers. Yeah.
I don't want to see you in hospital. I don't want to see you just company, but it's
Good for you.
might be another 10 years.
One more question here, and then maybe
Yes, sir.
we might take a few more slides.
Yeah, we can. And look, I know that these sessions are predominantly Q&A. That's fine. That's not my first rodeo. So that's fine. I'm happy to go through that. Yes, sir.
Yeah, thank you. Is this coming through?
Yes, I can hear you.
Are there any countries which are, from an insurance point of view, a higher level of risk in terms of I want to go to?
Have you seen my slideshow? Have you had a pre look at my slide? You know what's coming next, don't you?
You're going to cover that off. Yeah.
Yes, there is, and we will talk about that. Yeah, very much so. Okay, so these were just some examples that I put together. But what I wanted to demonstrate was just this difference between yes and no. And yeah, okay, if the answer is yes, you are still having treatment, well, from the insurer's perspective, they're going to go, sorry, that's not something that we can cover at the moment, in most cases. But if you kind of go, well, actually, yes, I've had blood cancer, but I'm not actually undergoing treatment, as defined by... But as I say, I'd be pretty black and white. To me, my instinct straight away, if you are taking a chemo tablet, I'd say yes. That is, I would have thought. But hey, look, we can always go and ask. And if one insurer says, yes, it is, hey, maybe the next one says, no, we're okay with that. Okay. But yeah, what I was trying to demonstrate is just the difference between what happens with these assessments. It's not black and white. It's not, no, they won't cover me. Yes, they will cover me. It's each individual circumstance. What else affects travel insurance premiums and whether you'll be able to get cover? Age is one. Yeah, obviously, right? Don't need to explain that. Lead time. Don't even know what I mean by lead time. Yeah, correct. Okay, so lead time is if you were to come to me and take out your travel insurance now for your trip next June, that's a big, long lead time. Now, I'll give you a little bit of information. 30% approximately of travel insurance claims are before anyone's got anywhere near an airport. Okay, cancellation claims, and particularly relating to pre-existing medical conditions. Okay, so the lead time can affect A, your premium, and B, whether the insurer is comfortable with offering cover. Okay, because if you're going next week, you are a far less risk than someone who's leaving in 6 months' time. Makes sense, right? Okay. Duration, how long you're away. If you're away for a week, well, there's probably a lot less chance of something going wrong than if you're away for 3 months. Okay? So that has an effect. And destination, where you're going. Okay? So if we put these things together, you look at it and you say, okay, well, I've got someone who is going to Australia in 2 weeks' time. They're going for a week and they're in their mid-20s. From an insurance perspective, dream, absolute dream. The only problem with these guys is they never make a claim. And that actually becomes a problem for insurers because their loss ratios become too low. And therefore, they then have a customer value proposition issue because you can't be charging for something that they don't make any claims. So if you take an Air New Zealand integrated policy to Australia these days, when you get back, you'll get an email saying, "Hope you had a great trip. What went wrong?"
That doesn't make sense, does it?
It's crazy. It's crazy.
That
But they
want
get
you to make a claim.
correct because they get audited. So insurers get audited, and so if you're making too much money, you know, then they say,
They've knocked on the head and-
kind of. They basically sort of this is what they do. So when you get back, they're going, "Welcome home, Mr. Owen." You know, so what happened? Well, nothing happened. Are you sure? Are you sure? Are you sure there wasn't? You know, you didn't break some glasses. You didn't lose a phone. I didn't. Are you sure you didn't lose a phone? So that's the sort of thing. However, if you are a 73-year-old that has booked to go to the States in 6 months' time and you're away for 4 weeks, when you get back, you're not going to hear from the insurer. They're not going to ask you if you have any claims. All right, you're going to have to go to them. All right. Now, I'll break some myths. The Fair Insurance Code in New Zealand is very, very strong. You know, there are some ideas that insurers are crooks. They're not crooks. And they can't be crooks because they can't get away with it. You simply cannot get away with it. It is so tight. The Fair Insurance Code will not allow you to, you know, try not to pay a claim. It's there in black and white, and anything that is in the grey area, it's actually in the best interest for a travel insurance company to pay that claim because otherwise it will go to the Ombudsman and the Ombudsman will normally favour on your side. Okay. What sort of destinations are higher risk than others? Okay, so therefore, when you're completing medical assessments, sometimes you might complete a medical assessment for one destination that comes back as declined, but you complete the same assessment for a different destination, it comes back as approved. Why is that? Well, if you go to Australia, the chance of the medical costs, the risk of medical costs is very low. We have a reciprocal health agreement. You'll pay a little bit, you know. If you go to a GP, you'll pay for that. If you need an ambulance, you'll pay for that. But if you end up in a public hospital requiring treatment, you ain't paying for that. So therefore, from an insurance perspective, fine, it's a low risk. But if you go to the States, they'll charge you $1,000 just to open the door and walk in. Thank you, that's $1,000. All right. So therefore, it's a completely different risk. Even the UK and Europe are completely different risks because the UK has a reciprocal health agreement with New Zealand. So you would be covered under the NHS whilst you're in the UK. So if you end up in a public hospital, you'll be covered under the NHS. If you end up in a public hospital in Switzerland, it's going to cost you a lot of money. So therefore, it's different risk.
Exactly what my question was going to be is the reciprocal arrangements with the UK, for example, and Australia.
Is that working now? How about now?
Oh, that's better.
Thank you. So if I go to Australia or the UK, how much is the reciprocal medical cover?
What does it cover?
Pay? What does it cover?
Yeah.
And is it worth taking, for example, health travel insurance to Australia or not?
Okay, so the reciprocal health agreement generally covers public hospitals. Okay, so it won't cover you. It won't cover your GP fees. It won't cover your ambulance fees, and it won't cover you if you need to go for any sort of specialist treatment or to a private hospital. Okay, so that pretty much is it in a nutshell. It covers public hospitals. So the question, I mean, I always get asked is, I'm only going to Australia, would I need to take out insurance? Well, there's two things there. Number one, yeah, you could still incur medical costs because they charge you per kilometre for an ambulance in Australia. Quite a big place. That could be quite a lot of kilometres, right? Plus, you know, you might go to the GP and it might cost you $100. Well, you want to claim that, you know. The other thing is that there are other things that you need to claim on travel insurance as well. So this is one of the things we say in here, and we are focused on one thing, which is obviously, how do we get cover for this condition? How do I get cover for that condition? What are the costs going to be? Well, what about if you were to slip and break your leg? That had nothing to do with your medical condition. You need cover for that. What if your luggage goes on a separate holiday somewhere else, which happens quite regularly, or will do?
You don't need cover for a broken leg because you get taken to a public hospital.
By an ambulance. And I'll tell you what's more, in Australia, an ambulance will take you to the nearest hospital. Always the nearest hospital. Now, I always say that use the example of the Gold Coast and the amusement parks in the Gold Coast. The nearest hospital to Dreamworld is a private hospital. And they will take you there first for assessment. And you will get a bill from them. Yeah, and then the ambulance will take you to the public hospital, and you'll get a bill for that too.
You've answered my question.
Yeah, it's always worth taking. Yes, this gentleman over here.
Just getting back to what you were saying before, for people that have been in remission for some time, this gentleman here, 10 years, if you're not getting checked for your markers, for your cancer markers, and it turns out you're claiming and they're saying, oh, you actually have had this for the last 2 years but weren't aware of it, does that become a problem?
If you weren't aware of it and it wasn't medically documented, it would be unreasonable to decline that claim. Okay, all you can do is base your cover on what you have medically documented and what you have, the conversations you've had with your specialist, what they've presented to you. So when you're completing a medical assessment, and I'm asking you these questions, you're going to base it on what you know and what's there and has been medically documented. So if you were to then have a medical event that led to a claim that wasn't part of that medical documentation, what the claims officer is going to do is they're going to base their assessment of this claim on that medical documentation, what was there at the relevant time, i.e. when you took out the insurance. So if it's not there, then effectively it didn't exist. I mean, it did, but it didn't, if that makes sense. So that's one of those where maybe back in the day when the Fair Insurance Code wasn't quite so strong, those are the sorts of things that they might be able to try and get away with. Not anymore. Yeah, you'd have to pay that. Yeah. There's one here first.
Have to.
Yeah. These guys, they're going to be able to hear you at the back.
The insurance that's on credit cards, I've not read all the detail there, but I mean, if you did break your arm or something, is that included or is it?
Yeah,
not?
look, they're not so bad that you don't. It's not worth taking, but they do have terms and conditions on that you need to be aware of. And if you haven't taken the time to really read through it, don't use it. I'm not allowed to give advice. I'm not a financial advisor. If I was having this conversation with my mum, I would tell her not to use it, right? Because if she hasn't thoroughly gone through it, they're not awful policies. In fact, some of them are very good, but they do have age conditions on there. They have conditions on, they'll only cover you for cancellation cover within a certain period of departure. They have little things like that, and they're all a little bit different. So if you're going to use a credit card policy, that's fine. Just make sure you do your research on it first. It's always there. It's always sitting in the background. Would I generally rely on them? No. But they're not all bad. Just make sure. Just look what the age restrictions are on them as well, because some of them go down like 60, and you go, yeah, exactly. So just be aware of that. This gentleman here.
Yeah. Did you want to? I just have a general question about medical evacuation.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if you're in a country like, say, Fiji or Indonesia or in the Pacific Islands.
What, you don't want to go to hospital there?
Well, Does your travel insurance broker,
Yeah.
do you is that a default standard where if you are in a country where the standard of medical care might not be the same,
Yep.
as in you'd expect in Australia, New Zealand,
Correct.
or the UK, is that like the default
Yep.
position?
That's pretty much what they look
You'll
at.
get transported
Yep,
somewhere?
absolutely. If you're not going to receive the adequate treatment, and they do generally look at this of the same standard that you would receive here in New Zealand, and basically therefore, because again, the last thing an insurer wants to do is say, no, we're not going to bring you home, and then you die in Samoa. Who does that fall on? It falls on the insurer, and it gets plastered all over the media, and that's the worst thing that could happen. So it's in their best interest to say, actually, it's better. I mean, it's not cheap, medical evacuations from the islands. You know how much it costs for a medevac from Rarotonga? Looking at about $250,000. Yeah, depending on what you need. But do you know what? A good example of just how good the standard of travel insurance is in New Zealand. I'll give you a little story. This is from my old employer. They had a customer that was in Fiji, and it was a very large man, okay? And he became seriously ill, and he couldn't be treated. They didn't have the facilities to treat him in Fiji, but he wouldn't fit on the standard Medivac helicopter. They couldn't get him on there. So they ended up chartering an Air New Zealand plane over to Fiji with the medical team on board, got him onto that Air New Zealand plane. I think it might have been an A320, might have even been a bigger one, and flew him back on that. They went and chartered an Air New Zealand plane to get this guy back, and he survived. Without that, he wouldn't have survived. That's how good the standard of travel insurance is in New Zealand. It really is excellent. So, yeah, they will do that. Another one we get asked all the time is, what about in South Africa? People go to South Africa and they say, well, you'd never use a public hospital in South Africa. Well, most travel insurers know that. And they just straight away, that's their default. You would use a private hospital in South Africa, absolutely, and that would be covered. Question at the back there.
Yeah, just on lead time. We're here because we've actually already taken insurance out for a trip that we're doing in May and June next year. And as an exercise, because we'd heard that some people were having trouble getting cover for the condition that we're trying to cover, I put in a short lead time. And the condition, which was multiple myeloma, was declined. But for our booking from, we took the insurance out in July for travel in May and June, and we had no problem with the cover. So I'm just wondering what the logic behind that was, where we had when you had a shorter lead time.
There isn't any.
They wouldn't cover, yeah, and we rang up and spoke to
the same insurer.
Yeah. Well, in fact, it was 3 insurers. We actually tried it on 3 different insurers just to see. Because we had heard that people had to call up and then actually talk to someone about and explain what the situation was before they got the cover for short cover for a short lead time, whereas ours is a long time. We had no problem, just straight through, boom, on 2 of them. One
I can't answer that.
Yeah, okay.
Can't answer that. No, I mean, the logic is that the longer the lead time, the greater the risk. I mean, that is the logic. So that's bizarre. I mean, yes, maybe I would say different insurers maybe might look at it slightly differently. One insurer might sort of just have a set criteria regardless of the lead time, whereas another insurer, like maybe a Covermore who actually do look a bit closer at that lead time. That's the logic. Yeah. Yeah. Well, see, if you'd done that with me, I would have rung their operations manager directly, because he's a good mate of mine, and said, "What is going on here? That doesn't make sense. Make it make sense to me." Yeah. Yeah. No, it's a good question. It's a good question because it doesn't make sense. But yeah, but that's one of those things that with the contacts I have, I'd go and find out. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Yeah, just back to that question the gentleman asked about the lead time. My travel broker was advising me last year to actually buy travel insurance 5 months before my actually travel. Mm-hmm. So I said, why I need to do that? So, well, you just purchase the tickets, right?
Correct.
What if next day you break your legs?
Correct.
What are you going to do, right?
Correct.
but you can, claim this and story. Now I'm listening different stories is just actually impact the cost of premium if I go the 5 months.
It can do.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
I'm not sure now what's the true actually.
Yeah, it can
What
do.
should
I mean,
we
look, the advice you were given is correct. I mean, you should, as soon as you make an investment, you need to cover that investment. You pay for the flights. Most flights are non-refundable. You cover those flights, okay? But some insurers will put a lot of focus on lead time, and others won't. Others don't look at it at all, and it doesn't actually affect the premium. So, for example, Allianz don't. It's just they have an unlimited cancellation cover, and they don't factor in lead time, whereas Covermore do. So, it's different providers. But then there's also, you can add another layer to that, and you could say, right, let's say you were purchasing flights now, and you were going to put a deposit down on your cruise, but you're not actually paying the balance of your cruise for another 6 months. Well, you don't need to cover the balance of that cruise now because you haven't paid it. It's not an investment that you've made. So what you would do is you'd cover the flights and the deposit that you've made, and in 6 months' time, you can, when you pay the balance on your cruise, you can add that cancellation cover into your insurance. So for someone like Covermore that do actually break it down that granularly, you can do that. Because otherwise you'd be paying for the balance of your cruise 6 months in advance to when you've actually paid it. Does that make sense? Yeah. So it's a conversation that you can have with your travel agent or your travel broker. But if you're not 100% sure or convinced that they're sure about it, hey, that's what we're here for. Just come through to us. Yeah. What else have I got on here? So we've talked about age, lead time, duration, destinations. But wait, there is one more thing that I have to talk about. And it's a product called Cancellation Plus. Okay. So let's say you were to come through to me or my team and we did a medical assessment for you and it came back as declined. Okay, so now first of all, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't take insurance. You should still take travel insurance, even if they're not covering that particular condition. Because they will still cover anything that is not directly or indirectly relating to that condition. So we'll use the example as everyone's favorite example. I broke my leg. I don't know why we always revert to that, but I'll use a different one, right? Let's say you woke up the morning that you were due to fly and you had an ear infection. Really bad ear infection. You can't fly at 40,000 feet with a really bad ear infection. That's it. Your trip's cancelled. Well, if you didn't take travel insurance because it didn't cover your pre-existing medical condition, you'd be feeling pretty gutted right now because that would be covered because it's got nothing to do with the condition that was declined. Does that make sense? And again, also when you're overseas and your luggage goes missing or those things again, yes, you can still get cover for everything else.
If you're eliminating cancer, you
Yeah.
can still get covered.
Yeah.
For any other.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
So if we phoned you, we say, let's forget about
Yep.
Cancer related.
Yeah. Well, we do the assessment and we go, right, it's come back as declined. All right, fine, let's forget about that, but we still need to put your cover in place.
On that one, would it not be then a case of, say, you take the cover, you know you've got cancer, and you break your leg and they say, well, hang on, we wouldn't have given you the cover in the first place if we knew you had cancer, so we're not covering that.
No, because the reason that you've broken your leg has nothing to do with the cancer. It's not directly or indirectly. Yeah. No, this is the old school. This is old school insurance, but not anymore.
But
No.
you have to say, listen, I've got cancer, and they come back, okay, there's no cover. Was there no cover for cancer? You receive cover for everything
Yeah,
else.
and it will actually come back on the assessment. So there's no cover for these conditions. Boom, 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 and it will actually name them. What's more, some insurers, like Covermore, will actually allow you to cherry pick your pre-existing medical conditions. So let's say we declared your cancer and it came back as not covered, but you also had a heart condition that was completely unrelated to the cancer, and we did the assessment for that, and that came back as covered. They will allow you to do that. They'll say, right, cool, we can still cover your heart condition, but we're not going to cover anything directly or indirectly relating to your cancer. So not all insurers will allow you to do that, but some will, and obviously we're well versed on that. So that's really good as well that they'll allow you to do that. they're generally covered automatically. They normally put some criteria around it. What they want to see is that it was, so the usual criteria is it was performed more than 6 months ago, i.e. it's all settled, no problem, and it was less than 10 years ago, because after 10 years they go, oh, now you might. So generally those things are covered automatically. Yeah. Was there, no, there wasn't a question there. One over here. I'll come back to the Cancellation Plus. It's exciting. It's like my mic drop moment with the Cancellation Plus, but we'll come back to it because it's the best bit at the end.
I just have a question on remission because I have CML and I had a bone marrow stem cell transplant, but it came back after 8 months. So I'm just on the monitoring side, but of course my paperwork shows that my levels are up and down. So I'm not classed as remission, and how long from my last test do I get classed as?
So this is those lines in the sand. So this is where we actually come back to the assessment, and you sort of the sorts of questions that they ask for CML. Now, you answer a question slightly differently, and it'll go off in a slightly different direction. But they will always say, there'll always be the question, when was your last treatment? Within the last 12 months, 1 to 3 years, et cetera, et cetera. So when we answer those questions, it will determine, where that level of risk is at. So yeah, again, it's one of those where you sort of go, look, it's case by case, and it would be a case of just sitting down and going through that assessment and seeing. I mean, they do like it when you're in remission. And what's more, what we'd call sort of general checkups, that's not considered treatment or anything like that. You go, if you're in remission, you go back every 6 months to go and get checked. Well, that's fine. That's because that's what they do every 6 months. They give you a blood test every 6 months to check your bloods. It's fine. That's just a standard. Yeah, it's not considered a treatment or something new. Hey. Oh, sorry, we've got a microphone here, and then we'll hand it on down.
I really struggle with the medical assessment, that it goes off to medical assessors. Who are these people? I feel like they probably know absolutely nothing about your particular cancer, and you don't get a chance to speak to them to explain. We've had insurance declined when my husband had absolutely no symptoms, nothing wrong. And you go through all the questions, never had a broken bone, never had kidney issues, never, answer the questions all correctly. Yeah. But then it goes off and they come back and say no, and you can't ask why, and you can't ask, well, what do you know? Because, a lot of people don't know unless you're the specialist in that field. Yep. You'd probably be pretty clueless.
Okay. So generally, good question. Generally, I would, particularly for things like blood cancers and leukemias, I would do that assessment with you through the portal that's there. All right, so it's got a set of questions. All right, so we're literally just sort of going, it's painting by numbers. Here's your multiple choice options. Book for you answer that. We get to the end of that and it's declined. Now we say, right, okay, well now we do have the option now of sending this to their medical team. So again, I use Covermore as an example. I mean, we do use multiple, but I use them as an example because I know that their operating process is inside and out. That would go through to their medical team in Brisbane. Now they are a qualified medical team. Now, do they have specialists in that field? Maybe. They won't have a whole department there, but they've got someone there who's actually got experience in that field. They do try and make sure that they cover off, they might have someone with some cardiology experience and et cetera, et cetera. But then they will then come back to you directly, and they would say, and they'd come to you and they'd say, could you please provide us with this, 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 and this? And that's your opportunity then to go, okay, yep, I can provide you with this. Please be aware of this, this, and this. And you go back to them. So some of them you can have those conversations with directly, and that's why we use them, because they provide that level of service and they give you that opportunity. That's not me standing here saying they're definitely going to cover you, but at least, I hear what you're saying. You go, well, let me at least explain it to you. If we've done the online one and that's come back as declined. All right, well, let's say that's painted by numbers, but now we're going to do it manually. Let's actually look at it for what it's worth. So what they'll actually do is they will ask for all your medical documentation, and you send that through to them, so they will actually look at that. And as I say, that's why we use them, because that's what you want. Could be, yeah, it could be, but at least you've got an open dialogue then, where you can say to them, well, actually, this is what actually happened, and they can say, all right, well, they'll even communicate with you, with your specialists and that sort of thing to make sure that they've got it right. Yeah, as I say, doesn't guarantee cover that. Yeah.
I like to hear what you're doing, and I like your mode of operation. How do you get paid? Commission or fee to the client?
So no, we don't charge any fees. So there is a brokerage, and so we provide a customer. So we sell you a Southern Cross policy for $500. It'll be $500 online. You do it through us, and Southern Cross pay me out of that $500. Yeah. They'd rather you do it online, because then they don't have to pay me. But then you don't get the service. And the way I always liken it, it's a bit like booking travel, right? Some people book it online, and some people go into and you get charged more. And they say, well, why would I get charged for that? And I always ask, well, why do people charge for anything like mowing a lawn? Lawnmower guys come and mow the lawn. You could mow the lawn, but lawnmower guys come and mow the lawn because that's a service, and they're experts at that service. Chefs are experts at cooking food. You could cook it yourself, but you go to a restaurant and all those sorts of things. So it's that expertise and that service, but you're not paying anything different. We don't charge any fees at all, and we will help you at claim time as well. So if you're making a claim, we can't make a claim for you. You have to fill in the claim form, fill the documentation in, but you can send that to us. We can lodge it on your behalf, and then we can then communicate with the insurer if there's any grey areas on claims, and we do get those, believe it or not, quite regularly. But I actually resolved 2 just last week that had been going back and forth with the customer. I was able to contact the insurer and get them resolved for the customer there and then.
Could you tell me
Just
sorry, and then after this we've got 10 minutes left.
Perfect. Perfect, thank you.
Just briefly, could you give me your name and a contact?
I'll do better than that. I'll give you a business card.
That would be perfect.
Yeah, that's right.
Thank you.
Yeah. Let's talk quickly. We've got 10 minutes. I want to talk quickly about Cancellation Plus. So this is a product where if you had completed a medical assessment and it was declined, this product, Cancellation Plus, will provide you with some level of cancellation cover. We've talked about cancellation cover, the time between when you book and pay and when you leave, regardless of the fact that your medical condition has been declined. Okay? They used to call it cancel for any reason, and it was a brilliant idea until something called COVID came along. And then they suddenly realized, oh, that's what could go wrong. So they didn't do that anymore. So what they do now is they have a product called Cancellation Plus, which basically covers your individual circumstances that would not normally be covered by standard cancellation cover. So good example is a medical condition that has been assessed, it's been declined, but you can still get a level of cancellation cover prior to pre-departure for that medical condition, okay? Which is fantastic because, as I said, remember what I said, 30% of claims are before people leave, and particularly relating to pre-existing medical conditions. Now, if you create a product like this, you have to put some terms and conditions around it because there's only so much rope you can give yourself, right? So, as I say, it covers your individual circumstances, it's not normally covered. So what it won't cover is if we had another pandemic, it wouldn't cover that. It won't cover, a complete border closure that affects everybody. It's covering your individual circumstances. I'll give you another example. Could be you might have a family member that's really ill, and you want to book your trip, but you're like, what if Uncle Bob, what happens if something happens to Uncle Bob? It'll cover that scenario. Something happens to Uncle Bob. All right, cool, great. All right, we can't go. It'll cover that. Okay. It will cover 75% of the non-refundable costs that you've paid, up to a maximum of 10,000 per policy. So this is where I'm talking about the amount of rope you give yourself. Okay, so if you spent 60 grand on your trip, they're not going to cover 60 grand on this Cancellation Plus because that's just too much. They're giving you a level of cover to say we will give you up to 10 grand back per policy. Can we put individual people on individual policies even if they're traveling together? Yeah, we can. Covermore don't like it when I do that, but it's tough. That's the way they created the product. So yes, we can, which would give you 10 grand per person. Does that make sense?
So it's 2 people.
Would be 20 grand. Yeah, it would be 20 grand if we put them on 2 policies, separate policies, because it's 10,000 per policy. Yeah, yeah. So they don't state in the policy whether it's 10,000 per person. They state 10,000 per policy. So you put one person on one policy, one person on a separate policy. Yes, you might pay a little bit more premium, but you're going to get up to 20 grand's worth of.
What if he's healthy and you're not?
It's fine. It's fine because you're traveling together. Yeah. So your travel companion. It's fine. So you're not. So you're going to cancel because you're not healthy. The insurer wouldn't expect him to still go. leave her behind. Yeah, that would be a bit unreasonable. Yeah. Again, that's the old school way of doing it. Well, there's nothing stopping him. I don't think his life would be worth living when he got back, would it? That cancellation plus would have to be taken at the same time as taking out the policy. You can't take out your insurance 3 weeks ago, go, nah, I don't need that cancellation plus, and then all of a sudden find out that oh, actually we did need it. Oh, now we'll go and take it out now. And the same sort of logic applies behind this part. They will cover the costs that have been paid, that you're paying for at that time. They'll give you a 48-hour window beforehand. So what they're trying to do is they're saying, look, you take out your insurance on this day, and you take your cancellation plus at that time because you've determined, yep, I need to take that out. They're going to cover they're going to cover the costs, the travel costs that you pay for at that time and thereafter. But if you paid for something 6 months ago, didn't bother taking out insurance at the time, they're not going to cover that under cancellation plus. The standard cancellation cover will still cover that. That's fine. Standard cancellation cover is fine. You can take out your cancellation cover at any point up to the day you leave. But the cancellation plus, because they're saying, look, we're going to cover everything to your individual circumstances, they're saying, we will only cover what you're paying for at the time and thereafter. As I say, they do give you a little 48-hour window because you might be buying it on a Monday and you might have paid for something on Saturday, which is very, very thoughtful, often very considerate. So that is a fantastic product. It is only available through Covermore. As I say, we have a very, very close relationship with, so we can arrange that for you when you take out your insurance. So how do you contact us? So you can either email us at inquiries@travelinsurancebrokers.co.nz. That is a very long email. I did try and buy the domain TIB because that would have been a lot easier, but that's owned by the NZ Rugby Union. TIB, yeah. That's the face I pulled when I found that out as well. What is this TIB for NZ Rugby Union? Anyway, I've got it on back order, so that might shorten at the end of January. It is. Telephone number. Yeah, telephone number's there. You ring me or any of the team, or we do also have a website at travelinsurancebrokers.co.nz. But I do have cards, which I'll have at the back of the room with all that information on it. Guys, thank you so much. I hope it's been informative. I hope I've broken some of those myths and given you some encouragement so that you can actually potentially get some level of cover for your travel.
Thank you. We've got one more question here.
Oh, sorry.
You sure?
All right?
Nice. Well,
There was.
we've got time.
I'll just make a comment. About 8 years ago, we tried to get insurance through Covermore, and they turned us down for one point that I had a terminal disease, and it was it. There was no.
That exclusion has been removed.
It's been removed.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah.
So they will now allow you to assess for
Because I've just
terminal
done
conditions.
8 weeks, Europe, US, and the UK with Covermore.
Yeah, they will now. Yeah, so it used to be a general exclusion on their policy, and a lot of insurers it still is, but it's not anymore.
And just to make a point, I spent 1 week in Bath Hospital in the UK, no charge for anything.
Yeah.
So just to
That's it.
cover that. So
And public hospitals in the UK are generally very good.
okay, that's good.
There is a question at the back here. The higher risk. So basically, if you work it out, so the Americas, so you basically go Alaska down to Antarctica, That is the, yeah, that's why I went, so that is, but particularly North America, particularly the States, but that's the first. Then you sort of go over into your Africa and mainland Asia. This would be the next, and maybe into Japan. There's quite high medical costs there. Then you'd work through the next level of because it's all based on medical costs and evacuation costs. So they do Africa and mainland Asia because you have to do a lot of evacuations out of Nepal, for example, and that's very expensive, but you do a lot of them. So therefore the loss ratios on that region are quite high. Then you go into Europe, but then you segregate Europe and the UK because of the reciprocal health agreement. Do you see? So it works its way down until eventually you end up in, a lot of them will corner off Southeast Asia. So if you're looking at something and you're going, oh man, I'm not getting covered to go for my trip to China, have a look at Thailand, because Southeast Asia is generally considered a lower risk than mainland Asia. Then you go into the South Pacific, then Australia, then back to New Zealand. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.